Welcome to Lesson 3. Building on what we learned about empathy mapping, today we're going to create personas. A persona is a fictional character that represents a segment of the users you're designing for. But here's the key. It's fiction grounded in fact. A persona isn't invented from imagination. It's synthesized from real research about real people. Personas give us a memorable way to keep users at the center of our design decisions. When you're debating a design choice, you can ask, what would Maria do? Would this work for James? Let's learn how to create personas that serve this purpose. By the end of this lesson, you'll accomplish 3 objectives. First, create evidence-based personas from qualitative and quantitative data. Your personas will be grounded in research, not assumption. Second, avoid stereotyping while maintaining persona specificity. This is a delicate balance. Personas need to be specific enough to be useful, but not so narrow that they become caricatures. And third, use personas effectively to guide intervention design decisions. Personas are tools, not decorations. We'll learn how to actually use them in the design process. A persona is a fictional character that represents a segment of your users. Think of it as a composite, synthesizing patterns you've observed across multiple real people into one memorable character. Personas include demographics, age, occupation, family situation, but they go much deeper. What are this person's goals? What are their frustrations? What's their typical day like? How do they make decisions? The purpose is to bring data to life. Statistics are abstract. Maria, the 52-year-old home health aide juggling 2 jobs while managing her mother's diabetes and her own high blood pressure. That's concrete. You can imagine her life. You can design for her. Why do personas work as a design tool? First, humans relate to stories and characters better than data. We evolved to understand people, not spreadsheets. A persona leverages our natural capacity for social understanding. Second, personas create shared reference points across teams. When everyone knows who Maria is, discussions become more focused. We're not debating abstractions, we're discussing what works for Maria. Third, they prevent designing for an average user who doesn't actually exist. The average of many different users is no one. Personas keep us focused on specific types of real people. Fourth, they build empathy and accountability. It's harder to make design decisions that hurt Maria than to make decisions that affect users in general. Building personas starts with your research. Review your empathy maps and raw research data. What have you learned about the people you're designing for? Identify distinct user segments with different needs. Not all users are the same. Maybe you have working parents with time constraints and retirees with mobility challenges. Their needs are different enough that they warrant separate personas. Within each segment, look for patterns. What goals come up repeatedly? What frustrations? What constraints? Synthesize these patterns into character descriptions. The patterns become the persona's characteristics. If multiple interviewees mention struggling to get time off work for appointments, that becomes part of the persona's story. A complete persona includes several elements: name and photo. This might seem superficial, but it matters. Maria feels more real than Persona 1. Use stock photos of real people to make the persona tangible. Background includes demographics, occupation, and family situation. This sets the context for their life circumstances. Goals describe what they're trying to achieve, not just health goals, but life goals. To be there for my grandchildren is a goal. So is to feel in control of my health. Frustrations are the barriers they face. What makes things hard for them? What gets in the way of their goals? Behaviors describe how they typically act. How do they seek information? How do they make decisions? Who do they trust? And a quote captures their perspective in their own voice, something that crystallizes who they are. Here's a critical caution. Personas can easily become stereotypes if we're not careful. How do we avoid this? Base every characteristic on research evidence. If you can't point to data that supports a characteristic, don't include it. This prevents projecting your assumptions. Include complexity and individuality. Real people contain contradictions. Maria is health conscious but struggles to find time for exercise. She's skeptical of the healthcare system but fiercely advocates for her mother's care. Avoid reducing people to their demographics. Maria is not defined by being Latina or being 52. Those are facts about her, but she's a full person with unique characteristics. Test your personas with community members for accuracy. Show your persona to people from that community. Does this ring true? Am I missing something? What would you change? Their feedback keeps you honest. A common question: how many personas should you create? Typically, 3 to 5 personas are sufficient for most projects. If you have too few personas, you miss important variation in your user population. You might design only for the easiest users, while harder to reach populations are ignored. If you have too many personas, it becomes difficult to keep all of them in mind during design. The tool loses its usefulness. Consider distinguishing between primary and secondary personas. Primary personas are the main focus of your design. If something works for them, you're succeeding. Secondary personas have needs that should be accommodated when possible, but aren't the primary design target. This prioritization helps when you have to make trade-offs. Personas are only valuable if you actually use them. Here's how. Post your personas visibly where the team works. On the wall, at the front of the meeting room, visible on shared digital workspace. They should be impossible to ignore. Reference personas in design discussions. When someone proposes an idea, discuss it in terms of the personas. What would Maria think about this? Would James be able to use this? Use personas to resolve disagreements? Would this work for the people we're designing for? That question often clarifies the right direction. And use personas to prioritize. If you can't do everything, what matters most to your primary personas? Their needs should drive prioritization. Let me share an example. Maria is 52 and works as a home health aide. She actually works 2 jobs to support her family. She's also the primary caregiver for her mother, who has diabetes. Her goals are to stay healthy enough to keep working and to be there for her family, especially her grandchildren. Her frustrations include having no time for herself and feeling overwhelmed by medical information that seems to contradict itself. Her quote captures her perspective. "I know I should take better care of myself, but there's always someone who needs me more." Now, when you design an intervention, you can ask, would Maria be able to fit this into her life? Does this respect her time constraints? Does this acknowledge her caregiving role? Maria keeps the design grounded in reality. Let's summarize our key takeaways. Personas are fictional characters that represent user segments, but they must be grounded in research evidence. They're not imagined, they're synthesized from real data about real people. Personas make data memorable and relatable. They leverage our natural capacity to understand and empathize with characters. Key elements include goals, frustrations, behaviors, and a representative quote that captures their perspective. Avoid stereotypes by grounding every characteristic in evidence and including the complexity and individuality that real people have, and use personas actively. They should be visible, referenced in discussions, and used to guide decisions. A persona on a shelf helps no one. In our next lesson, we'll learn journey mapping, understanding the user's experience over time. Thank you.